challenge I had with my postgraduate course, which concerns consumer behaviour, was I wanted to give students a taste of a small research project. One of the things I focus on with my postgraduate students is this idea of lifelong learning. And I'm quite wedded to this lifelong learning rubric, and there are two criterion on this rubric which I particularly like. One is about curiosity and the other one is about reflection. So one of the things I say to my students, as a marketer, I believe you should be incessantly curious, always wondering why people are doing the things they're doing. You know, always, when you're out and about, always observing. But this is something often we don't do. I also say to my students, you know, this is probably one of the few courses you will come into where you're an expert, because we are all consumers. We've been consumers for many years, some of us longer than others. But we often don't think of ourselves in that sense of being experts. So they come into this course with a certain amount of knowledge. So I want them to take that knowledge and, you know, and sort of use it within that assessment task. So in terms of this idea of being curious, what I do is I say to them, your very first assessment task is going to be observational research. It's only very small, this little research project, but it gives them an opportunity to go somewhere, and a shopping centre is always a good place, a fairly easy place, and just sit and observe consumers. See what they're doing, how they're interacting. Because one of the things we know with research is people will tell you one thing, but may behave in a totally different way. So even though we may not be able to understand why somebody is doing something, we can still observe them engaging in that behaviour. As I said, a really easy example I use for my students is, say, a food court. You observe people at a food court to observe, if you think about all the different kiosks that were there, some healthier than others, where people go. And, you know, what's the age, what's the demographic, all those things about those people. So that's quite a simple way of looking at it. But really what I'm doing here is I'm getting them to think differently. I'm getting them to, as I said, really pique their curiosity. And I'm hoping when they've finished this task, they won't forget that. They will continue to be curious when they're out and about. Because, as I said, this is, it provides very valuable data, I think, as a marketer. Because marketing is just a, you know, it's a different way of looking at the world, I believe. You know, as a marketer, we don't see problems, we see opportunities. So again, as I said, I talk about having a marketing mind to my students. As I said, and that marketing mind, a part of that is being incessantly curious. And now, because this is quite a small research task, and I know they're not going to be able to spend a great amount of time on it, I tell them to probably a couple of times, you know, go to the same place and observe consumers. And I said, and when I say consumers, that's quite loose. They could be going to a musical festival, they could be going to a sporting event. It doesn't, you know, specifically have to do with, you know, being in a shop or being in a shopping centre. I said, and before you go, sort of frame that, you know, that research problem. You know, what are you interested in observing? So have some idea. So I tell them to have quite a broad research objective, first of all. So you might want to, again, to use that example of the food court, you know, how people make choices in food court, healthy choices. So that gives them a guiding sort of framework to approach the task. They then go and do their observations. It's all unobtrusive, so they never ever interact with the people. They record those, you know, those sort of comments that they have as they've made those observations, and then they interpret those observations. And that's when they're looking at the data. You know, here are their findings, and they're interpreting it. Now, based on that, I want them to sort of think about some marketing implications. And that's important because this is a marketing course. And again, it puts them in the, you know, in the frame of mind of being that consumer researcher. So what would they take back to that organisation if they'd been sent out to do that as a researcher? You know, what does that organisation want to know about their customers? And I also say to them, because this is research, whenever you do research, invariably it opens up the possibilities of other research. So I ask them to also, well, you know, think up some more research possibilities. So having observed people, it might be that you may want to go back and survey them or do some in-depth interviews. So if we take the food court example, it may be you might want to go and interview people to say, you know, why did you make that particular food choice? You know, were you influenced by the friends around you? There's a whole raft of things that you could ask people. And again, what you're doing is you're collecting more data and getting a sort of a richer picture of the, you know, of consumers and perhaps that particular segment. No, I've been running this task now for a few years because when I teach this course, I say to my students, as I said, they come in as an expert, but they have limited knowledge of the theory. So I'm taking the sort of broad macro perspective. And then for that second assessment task, they're starting to look at a lot more theories, more of those psychological aspects, so they then take this micro perspective. But the feedback that I've had from that observational task has overwhelmingly been positive, and people have been so surprised at the things they've observed, all the topics that they've chosen. For example, I've had somebody that observed how people purchased avocados, and just something as simple as seeing how people, you know, the amount of counting people who feel them as opposed to people who don't. And they would also provided the background to that because at that particular time avocados were very expensive. So again, they're able to give that context to, you know, why that would be important. I mean, as I said, there's such a variety of things that people have looked at. Another one was somebody looked at, because I give students a lot of guidance here in terms of looking at the atmospherics, the situation that they're in. You know, it's not just the consumers, it's how consumers are interacting with that environment. Therefore, that environment also becomes a part of that research project. So people looking, say, maybe comparing, say, you know, an Apple store and a, you know, and another shop in terms of a lot of the atmospherics would be in the Apple store and the way people interact with customers, etc. They're really quite surprised because I said, you know, we tend to be in these environments very frequently, and yet we very rarely truly observe what is going on. So again, as I said, it's really about emphasising that idea of curiosity and hoping that students will develop it as they progress through the course. One of the things we're very much focused on now is authentic assessment. So, and my role, I see as an academic, is to try and provide that link between the theory, because I think that is our role as a university, as academics, to explain the importance of theory, because often students don't understand why it's relevant, and providing that link between that and something that is very practical. Now, obviously, as a marketer, it is incredibly important to do research. Research doesn't have to be expensive, and that's one of the points that I make here, that a very simple task can actually provide you with some very good insights. But at the same time, you can go into the literature and you can see how the literature can inform some of the decisions that you might make in a marketing context. Not so much in this task because, as I said, they're coming in with a limited amount. But in terms of, if you think about people interacting, the idea of social influence, you know, how important is the influence of other people in any of these settings? And that would maybe, possibly is one of the things you would see in a shopping centre, the way perhaps young people might shop in groups. You can obviously sort of take that, that's a takeaway, or that finding is that, you know, there is social influence going on. And it's been quite interesting. That to me has been one of the great insights in teaching students this course at a postgraduate level. They have been quite surprised at how important social influence is in their life and what an impact it has over the decisions more generally.